Welcome to another episode of The Next Generation. Today I have Anna Cobza on with me, and I am so excited to chat with her today about just her experience and everything else. Anna, I'm just going to let you take it away. Tell the world about who you are, what you do, your story, all of the things.
Yeah, so I am a Nebraska native. I'm from a small town in eastern Nebraska. I work in the feedlot industry today. I'm a grad student working on my PhD in feedlot nutrition, but I did not grow up in ag originally. I grew up in a very much a rural town surrounded by lots of farmers, went to school with a bunch of farm kids, and was very much exposed to agriculture. And ultimately, I guess I had a desire to pursue a career in ag because of experiences I had in 4-H and FFA in high school through showing horses and showing cattle. And it led me down a path to consider a career in the beef industry. And I did my undergrad at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in animal science. And then I decided I really liked cattle nutrition. And so I wanted to get a master's in that. And I went down to West Texas A&M and the Texas Panhandle and was down there for a little over a couple years. And I came back here to Nebraska in January of 23, and I've been working on my PhD ever since. So we're kind of at the little over the halfway point of finishing that up. But the plan after this, once I graduate, is to get a job as a consulting feedlot nutritionist. And then, in addition to that, my fiance's family, they ranch in western Nebraska. So the plan is to someday move back there and kind of take over from his parents. They're ready to retire. So there's a lot of new things coming for me in my future.
Awesome. I would love if you could share a little bit more about, you kind of mentioned that you didn't grow up directly in agriculture. You grew up in rural America, but you weren't on a family's ranching operation or anything like that, but then truly found a love and a passion for the beef industry and for feedlot nutrition and everything that you're involved in now. And now you're such a voice and an advocate for the feedlot industry and just animal agriculture in general. What kind of led you down that path? Can you just talk a little bit more about finding that passion?
Yeah, so we grew up on a little acreage outside of town, and so we always had the space and the barn and, little farm animals, cats and dogs and things like that. So I showed horses for a long time, for the longest time, and so did my older siblings. And then eventually when I got into high school, I wanted a beef 4-H project, but those are expensive projects and they require a lot of time and resources and expertise that me or my parents didn't have. So I actually had a family friend who was like, you know what, he raised cattle, and he's like, you know what, I know somebody in western Nebraska who may be willing to help you out. And so there was a ranching family, seed stock producers in western Nebraska that were kind enough to lend me 2 breeding heifers for the summer and all the show feed that I need. And that summer I got to show those 2 in my county fair, and then at the end of the summer they went back and they're actually still with their herd today. So it was that experience that was my it moment where I was like, this is the career I want to work in someday. And after that I joined FFA. I went to a private high school, so we didn't have any ag programs or FFA programs, but the public school down the street did. So I went there and I joined their FFA program and took a couple ag classes here and there, did a little internship at our local vet office. So that was really what propelled me. And this wasn't something I thought about originally when I was considering a career in ag, but my grandpa was actually a cattle feeder in the 60s and into the 80s before the farm crisis in the 80s happened. So I never got to see his operation standing, but parts of it still exist today, owned by someone else. But so there's a little bit of a legacy for me there, as my grandpa left for me as a cattle feeder.
That's awesome. It's crazy how kind of like a full circle moment. Your grandpa was a cattle feeder, and now that's where you found your passion in the cattle industry, is through feedlot nutrition and just all of those sorts of things. There are a lot of different paths that you can go when getting a nutrition degree, a nutrition focus in agriculture. Why did you decide to get your PhD and go through the doctoral program and just go all the way? You're like, I'm not ready to be done with school. I want a little bit more of it. Can you talk talk a little bit about that decision? And specifically, obviously, UNL is where you did your undergrad, so probably coming back was extremely easy for you, but just all the things like that too.
Yeah. So, well, originally when I started out, I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. And then I worked for one and I decided that was not what I wanted to do. I had a wonderful experience with my hometown vet, and he taught me so much and let me do so many things. Ultimately, for me, it was the lifestyle. I was like, this man is at everyone's beck and call all the time. I can't do this, especially not as someone who wants to have a family of my own. So I was like, I think there's got to be something else out there for me. And so after my freshman year of college, at this point, I'd taken kind of our Animal Science 101 course. And of all the topics that you talk about, reproduction, genetics, management, nutrition, all that stuff, nutrition was the one that kind of came the easiest to me, what I understood the most, and what I found the most interesting. And I decided, I never had, I was always planning on going to school after my undergrad. So for me, it was kind of easy to just be like, hey, well, I'm just going to go to grad school and study nutrition. And that's the path I'm going to take. So, and I'm glad I did, because I think it's exactly what I was meant to do. And I enjoy, this field and learning, about all things feedlot research and nutrition so much, even more so after my master's. And, I will tell you, and I tell, aspiring grad students this all the time, like, grad school is very different from undergrad, and you have to really want to do it because it's going to be hard and you have to be very independent. Nobody really holds your hands like they do in undergrad. And ultimately, I mean, I don't think I needed a PhD to do what I want to do. Part of it for me is a little bit that the ag industry is turning over and that there's more and more women involved in like professional careers in the beef industry. But I think it's even more still male dominated, specifically in the feedlot space, where the consulting nutritionists that I think of, I can probably count on one hand the female consulting nutritionists that I can think of in this space. And so for me, it's a little bit of a kind of a valid self-validation and a little bit of like, I want to be respected and I want to feel like I have credibility someday when I'm cold calling people and asking them to hire me. And so, part of it's, yes, I think there's more to learn, but part of it is a little bit of just wanting to make sure I probably feel credible, working in a male dominated industry.
I think as a woman in agriculture, like a lot of people listening to this can probably understand that there have been amazing trailblazers of like just really influential, amazing women that have gotten really great seats at amazing tables over like just the past few generations and things like that. But it continues to be a male dominated field. And I think that that's like the reality that we live in, that there are amazing men in this field and we need to be so grateful for that. But at the same time, sometimes as a woman in agriculture, it can be difficult to be respected in those certain areas and at those tables. And so sometimes getting your PhD can just kind of be one of those like, no, I do know what I'm doing. I do have the credibility to do this. And I love that you touched on just all of that. Can you talk a little, like, what are you focusing on with your PhD? All of those sorts of things. What's your focus and studies in?
So my work has all focused on supplemental fat and feedlot diets. So we commonly feed fat as a way to increase the energy content of the diet. And, we feed a lot of the same fat sources that are being used by other industries. So like corn oil and tallow, the biofuel industry uses those as well to produce biofuel. And so there's a lot of competition in the marketplace right now for those fat sources, which has increased the cost and reduced the availability. So a lot of my work is focused on alternative sources or maybe different ways that we can capitalize on better fat digestion if we're going to pay more for it. And so that's what the bulk of my research has been. But I have a research coordinator position full-time with the university as well. So I kind of coordinate all of our metabolism and digestibility work we do. So right now the university got a really big grant to do a lot of research on methane production in beef cattle. So we're about to ramp that up here soon. So it's been a really crazy but kind of exciting time to kind of kickstart this, because this is really novel research that no one has done before on the scale that we're doing it. So it's been really good for me to get a learning experience as someone involved in kind of planning and coordinating that research, and just getting to learn all the things that we learned from it firsthand rather than reading it later on in a journal publication.
Yeah, absolutely. I love like just focuses that new grad students or new PhD students are choosing to focus in and stuff like that. Talking to my friends that are still in school and what they're focusing in, it's crazy the little niches that you can find, that there is so much information still to be found. And like sometimes you think like, oh, we've got it figured out. And then you look at it and you're like, oh, no, we don't. There's like, you're doing this whole thing over here that's like, we didn't even think about that being a possibility. Right. And I think it's really important, just like for innovation and continuing agriculture to be a sustainable business and sustainable in rural America. Your focus specifically on different fat sources and things like that is so vital, because we physically like cannot sustain competing against a biofuel industry as agriculturalists. It's not possible.
Nope, it's crazy. I mean, and that's what's so cool about research is the more you know, you find out there's less and less that you know. So it's cool because all of your research fuels more and more research, because as you find out more things, you start to question more things. And yeah, so it's ever evolving, and there's never something that you're not going to want to find out.
Oh yeah, for sure. I fully relate to that. I felt like during just my undergrad studies and everything like that, and just different research things that I continue to do to this day, that is the consensus, is the more research you do into something, the more you realize that, yeah, I know nothing about this actually. And can you talk a little bit about just like different ways that you see like the feedlot industry going in the next few years, some challenges that you see just kind of on the horizon, different things like that, that the feedlot industry has been under attack for a really long time, whether it be from within the agricultural industry or outside of the agricultural industry. It hasn't been easy in recent years. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about just the feedlot industry, but then there's also just other challenges outside of public perception. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, as far as opportunities go, I think there's lots of opportunities coming up, particularly in like the technology space. There's a lot of health monitoring, ear tags or cameras or things that are being developed to kind of help monitor animal health and try to improve our ability to diagnose, reduce our need to treat animals, reduce pressure on feedlot cowboys who have to work to diagnose those pens visually every day. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, as well as in the feeding space. You know, there's automatic feed trucks being tested and bunk reading cameras that are being tested. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff that is coming out that's trying to help alleviate some of the pressure on feedlot crews as we're dealing with labor shortages like most industries are. So I think there's a really good opportunity there. But of course, there's always challenges as well in our industry. There's plenty of feed additives we use in the industry that do different things. There's more that come out, and then there's some that come off the marketplace. So I think there's just challenges with public perceptions of what we're feeding. That's probably the biggest challenge, is we have a consumer population that cares more than ever about where their food was raised, who raised it, how they raised it, what it was fed, that kind of thing. So we have that challenge as well as an industry as a whole. Just the public perception of, beef produced at a large scale in a commercial feedlot is not as good as beef produced on a small scale from a small family farm. I'm a firm believer that size is not an indication of quality of care in any way. In fact, I'd argue that the larger some of these places are, the more well equipped they are to handle those cattle better and to care for them better. So there's just challenges with consumer perception. I think that's always going to be a thing. I don't think that will ever go away. But, you know, I think there's also a lot of opportunities out at the university. We're specifically trying to share with our undergraduate population all of the career opportunities that exist within a yard. Because we are struggling so much with labor, skilled labor. And so we're just trying to share with our students that there's lots of opportunities after undergrad that you may not have considered that are actually really good jobs that pay really well. These yards typically have really good benefits, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, the opportunities I think are really great and exciting, and I'm excited to see where they go in these next few years. It's fun to kind of think about how things are now for me in this industry and how they're going to change in the next 5 to 10 years compared to how they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago and how far they've come. So honestly, you almost really have no idea what's coming for you and how things are going to change. But it's also really exciting in that sense.
Yeah, it really is. It's exciting that like there are so many technological and just different things like that on the verge of just like coming to this industry and being really big within this industry. It's crazy how much technology has advanced in the past 5 years and all of the things that are just on the horizon for the next 10 years and things like that. It's really, really cool to think about and all of the things like that. You touched a little bit on like just consumer perception and things like that. And you talk about that kind of a lot on your social media platforms and different things like that. Can you touch a little bit more on just like different ways that you approach those conversations, different things that you really try to focus on as a person with a diverse background in agriculture, but a focus in the feedlot industry and stuff like that. Just like the education aspect of how we as producers can continue to just educate the consumer population.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I started really focusing on the feedlot specifically while I was doing my master's because I was working at a research feedlot every day. So I had the opportunity to share what I was doing every day. And people actually really loved that. And so I started doing more of it. And, you know, everyone has a different approach to how they advocate for an industry. And of all the, I guess, ag influencers that existed online when I kind of first started this platform, I realized that there was really no one representing the cattle feeder. And so that was kind of the role I decided to fill. And since then, I've learned a lot about how ways that are effective and ways that are not. I've learned that it's probably the hardest sector of the ag industry, of the beef industry, to advocate for. And that's partially because the end of an animal's life cycle is not exactly the most digestible concept to consumers, and it's not the easiest thing to talk about with them. I always like to say that, you know, on the ranch, I got lots of pretty pictures of new babies in the spring and cows going to grass in the summer. And on the perfect day, it just looks idyllic and it's beautiful. But even on a feedlot's best day, it's hard to make it look that pretty because dirt surface pens just are not as pretty as green rolling hills. But, you know, for me, I think it's not so much trying to change anybody's mind, but just giving them information and letting them internalize it themselves and decide, okay, do I want to shift my point of view on this or not based on this new information I was giving? And I've noticed too that, yes, there's a gap between consumers and producers, which is important and still needs to be addressed. But I've also noticed that there seems to be kind of this tension and gap between different types of producers in our industry as well. And I've noticed that a lot online, and it's kind of disheartening to see the way that producers talk to each other, and the disagreements in different management strategies or the way different producers think things should be done. I noticed there's a lot of differences and tension, I feel like, between commercial beef producers and direct-to-consumer operations, just because they're typically of a different scale, different background, different challenges, different, I guess, market entirely. So that's one of the things I've noticed as well. And so for me, it's just, I've learned that not all conversations are worth having. If someone doesn't have good intentions or really want to have a conversation with you, you don't owe it to them to try and give them anything if they have no desire to have a conversation. And you can easily tell because they're usually very abrasive or calling names or something like that, which is fine. You don't have to engage with those people. But for the people who do generally want to have a conversation, even if they disagree with you, I think as an industry, we generally lack active listening skills. We want to play defense first, which I get because we're all very passionate people. But I think it's important to hear the other side first, let them feel heard, find common ground with them, and then move forward from there. Because I think if they don't feel heard in the beginning, I just think it sets the tone if you listen to them first and give them a chance to speak because they feel respected and that you actually value having this conversation with them as well. So there's lots of different methods, and communicating on social media is really hard because you don't have a lot of the little soft communication skills that you get to use in in-person conversations. So it's a really big challenge, but I feel like I've gotten better at doing it. I'm not perfect at it still, and there's probably people who are way better at it than me, but those are just kind of some of the things that I've learned that have worked, or at least I think have the most positive outcomes.
Yeah, what you said about like finding common ground and all of those things are so key. I feel like in conversations just in general, but specifically when you are talking about things that, especially with someone that might disagree with you or doesn't know any better, and they're just listening to the biggest influencer, the biggest voice on social media that they can, and they truly just don't know any better. And
Yep.
It is so important for us as like producers to have grace in those situations with people that genuinely do want to learn more. And like they are open to sitting down like adults and having a conversation and talking it out. And we're not going to yell at each other or call each other names or anything like that, but we're going to sit down and we're going to just have a really great conversation. And I feel like you said, it is also overlooked within the agricultural industry. And that's kind of why I brought up earlier that sometimes feedlots get flack, not only from consumers, but also from producers. And I had Brandy Buzzard on my podcast a few weeks ago, and she brought up the fact that like there are producers out there that are using the social media tactics of like, or the marketing tactics of saying my like home raised beef is better than your Walmart beef or stuff like that. And I'm like, and she's like, that's attacking the agricultural industry. You're literally using tactics that like fear-based marketing to attack a different sector of the agricultural industry. Like, that's not how we need to be doing things around here. There is a better way. And can you just talk a little bit more about that like division that you've seen within just the agricultural industry from producers that maybe work on a cow-calf operation to the people that are finishing them in feedlots or background in yards or different things like that? There is a lot of division within the agricultural industry itself. And I feel like in order to continue to grow and combat this ever-changing world that we're living in, we need to be united and just like really presenting a strong front. And right now we can't stop fighting with one another. So
absolutely. Well, and I think we are now less than 2% of the population. And that is both impressive, but also kind of alarming at the same time that there's so little of us that are producing food for an entire nation. But that's way too small a number to be divisive. So we have to get on the same page at some point. But I think about like, for example, my fiance's parents, they started when they were 18 from scratch with nothing. And they've grown it today to a sizable commercial operation where we market our cattle through Superior Livestock. Those cattle go to a backgrounder or eventually finish in a feedlot, and that beef ends up on the grocery store shelves. So we don't sell beef direct to the consumer, but when someone purchases beef from the grocery store, although their dollars are not going directly in our pockets, their support for demanding beef is ultimately going to support us. So I agree with that sentiment completely that, I want demand for beef, period, whether you're buying it from me or you're getting it from the grocery store. And I think direct consumer operations telling their story online I'm in full support of that. And I think that's great because that's what I'm trying to do too, is tell my side of the story. But where I take issue with that is, again, those marketing tactics that are used to instill fear in other beef products. That's unnecessary. And so, yes, I would full-heartedly agree with Brandy on that as well. That we are all in this together. We need to support each other and make sure that there's demand for all of our products, because there is, and there's enough room for all of us in this industry. but there isn't room for any of us to be fighting with each other or fighting across industries. It's just, quite frankly, childish behavior, and to a degree, and it's not going to help our industry at large.
And I think a lot of it almost comes back to, we talk about there's a lack of just overall knowledge within the consumer base, but sometimes there's a lack of overall knowledge of the entire life cycle of an animal within agriculture as well. If you're a backgrounder, your focus is in backgrounding, and that is what you do every single day. You live and breathe it. And so obviously you're going to know more about it, but it is still your responsibility as a producer to be involved and understand what the hot topics are, or what's going on in the feedlot industry, where the next step in that animal's life cycle, it can't just be, well, they're not in my hands anymore, so I'm not worried about it. I feel like that's where some of the division comes from, is just like a lack of like just pushing ourselves to grow in that knowledge base. And then we in turn, like, some people probably just don't know any better or don't think any better when they say certain things, or when they're talking about, like, I feel guilty sometimes in my own life, because it's like, we have a cow-calf operation and the feedlots are way far down the line from where our cattle are when we're taking care of them and stuff. And so it's one of those things that you are educated highest in what you do every single day. But I feel like as an industry, you need to push yourself to be educated in all sectors of the industry, at least just staying up to date on the things that are happening, and like different ways that you can educate yourself as a producer, almost kind of putting on your consumer glasses of like, how can I educate myself here? That way I can better share my story, but then the story of agriculture as a whole, to make sure that in the way that I'm telling my story, in the way that I'm advocating for agriculture, I'm not diminishing a different sector of agriculture.
For sure. I agree with you completely. And I think that's a really good point about producers needing to understand the entire industry and not just what they do, at least to a degree. Because, I have to empathize with the consumer, because they are inundated with so much information and they're given so many choices at the grocery store. It's hard to know what to do or what choice to pick. And, we tell consumers, if you want the right information, go directly to the source, go talk to the farmer or the rancher. But then what do we do when that farmer or the rancher starts becoming a source of misinformation? So it's a really big challenge that I'm starting to see that I'm not quite sure how to tackle.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we didn't even really think that this was probably going to be an issue 5 years ago, or things like that. And then now it's one of those things that has just now started to come to light. And we've started to understand a little bit more as an industry and stuff like that. It's an ever evolving thing. None of us are perfect. And we've probably all been in that seat where we ourselves were uneducated or misinformed, or just didn't take the time to fully understand. And I think that a lot of it comes back to that. Like, are you as a producer putting yourself in shoes of continuing your education? Like yes, we might be like independent farming operations, but are you doing some professional development? Are you going to something like NCBA? And going and sitting down in these sessions and just learning from different sectors of agriculture? Are you in communication with your USDA office or your Farm Bureau office or things like that? And like continuing to learn, like, okay, what new like feed research studies are going out? What should I try this year? Like, we're in a drought. Let's try something new. Like, are you just sticking to what you've always known? Or are you trying to grow and continue to not only better your operation, but like expand just your own mind and your own understanding?
Yeah. It's so easy when you do something day to day to just get so sucked into your own worldview that you kind of don't realize what the rest of the world thinks. I'm terrible about this too. I overestimate what producers know sometimes, and I underestimate what consumers know. And so, it's easy to kind of get sucked into your own little hole in your own world and forget what the rest of the world is really thinking and what's really going on.
Yeah, you kind of talked about it earlier, but it's really easy as a cow-calf producer or something like that to share your story and to share
Mm-hmm.
about, like, it's very aesthetic. It's very
Mm-hmm.
pleasing to share about new baby calves being
Mm-hmm.
born, things like that. It's a lot easier than feedlots sharing their
Mm-hmm.
story or different like feedlot cowboys going out and advocating or just like sharing their
Mm-hmm.
day-to-day or nutritionists or a person that works in the vet trailer on feedlots, like whatever it be, it's not as aesthetic. And
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like there is a stigma that it's a lot harder to share on social media because for me, as like a cow calf operation, it's easy for
Mm-hmm.
me to go into my backyard and snap a quick little video with
Mm-hmm.
cows in the back and it be good and golden and
Mm-hmm.
great and it not offend people or at least offend less people.
Sure.
Whereas a feedlot, it's like you said, it's not as aesthetic. People, it's a lot easier for a consumer to look at
Mm-hmm.
that and be like, oh my gosh, those cattle are in terrible conditions.
Yep.
With when they just like truly just don't know. Can you
Right.
talk a little bit more about just like why people in the feedlot industry need
Mm-hmm.
to start using their voice more and not be
Yeah.
afraid to share, and then just like how they can share. It's going to look different when a person that's working on a feedlot day to day shares than when a person that works on a cow calf operation
Mm-hmm.
shares, and
Yep.
stuff like that. But you found a really great way to do it and have obviously gained a really great following on social media platforms and stuff like that. So I'd love to hear just kind of your insight on that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's easy as people involved in the feedlot industry, we know that those cattle have a certain amount of square footage in the pen that's recommended. They have a certain amount of space at the bunk that's recommended. They have a certain amount of space at the waterer that's recommended. There's slope in the pen. There's a certain slope so that water drains off. We put mounds in it so they have dry places to lay. There's all these things that engineers do when we design feedlots that are designed to provide cattle comfort and good animal welfare that the consumers don't know. And I don't expect them to know those things because I hope they don't expect me to be an expert in whatever their career or their industry is. So it's unfair to expect that of them, but we have an opportunity to share that information with them if they ask about it. And, I am also a believer in 100% transparency, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's not easy to share the ugly, but I think it's best to be honest and transparent about those things, especially. There's certain topics in our industry that there may be organizations that like to avoid talking about because they typically are a pain point with consumers or have a bad public perception. And I think those are the topics that probably need addressed the most because, the saying goes, we fear what we do not understand. So, in my opinion, should we not seek first to make clear what is most often misunderstood, especially those really hard topics or those pain points with consumers? So I would rather tell the truth and be criticized for that than hide it and then it later be found out that I was withholding information and be criticized for that. I think telling the truth might be painful up front, but I think in the long run, that is how you need to play the game. So that's my opinion on how transparent we should be. And I'm sure there's people who disagree maybe and would rather not share some of the things we do. But in my opinion, if you're that uncomfortable talking about it, maybe we shouldn't be doing it. So, I'm happy to discuss the hard stuff with consumers because I do think it's okay. And I know that I can, at the very least, try to share my point of view with them. And if they don't agree, they don't agree. But I'm not ashamed of sharing those things that we do.
I think it's really important what you just said that like if we don't agree, we don't agree. And it's okay to just agree to disagree sometimes. And you mentioned it earlier, like if someone is combative with you or things like that, sometimes they just don't deserve your breath and your energy as a producer as well, because the chances of you sitting there and changing their mind are pretty slim. But if someone comes to you with like an open mind and things like that, starting with the education and just really showing people that like, hey, this is why we have feedlots. Like, this is the purpose of feedlots. This is what we do to make sure these animals are happy, healthy, and safe in these feedlots. These are all the things that we're working on an innovation side. We're continuing to try and like get better and all of these things. We understand that it might not be the most aesthetic thing, but these animals, like, actually, like, we can track their stress levels and do all of these things. Like, here's some research studies on tracking stress levels in feedlot cattle, and that they're actually quite calm and quite happy most days, and like just different things like that, that it's okay to sit down and just like come from an educating heart, but then it's also okay as a producer to screw up sometimes. And I think that the fear of saying the wrong thing stops so many people from sharing in the first place.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I've messed up all the time, and that's how you learn from it. You figure out, maybe that wasn't the best way to discuss something with someone, and you learn to move on. I think where you'll never go wrong, even if you're worried about saying the wrong thing, I don't think you'll ever go wrong as long as you approach difficult conversations with kindness with these people, because I think if at least you can show respect and be kind, that is better than maybe saying something wrong, but also being hurtful and mean and condescending and any of those things.
Yeah, it's truly just like coming to the conversation with like, hey, I'm an adult. I want to sit here in this exact voice tone and just talk. I just want to talk. I want to hear your story, and I want you to share your story with me. And like, and then if you're willing to do that, can I also share my story with you? And then I want to ask questions, and I want to like hear more about your life, and then like the reasons that you do believe this. Like, how can I help you like down this path of being a trustworthy producer that you can come and look to? I want to be that person that you feel like you can trust to come and ask these questions, and not just like someone that you're like, oh, yep, they're a cattle producer, you can't trust them. Like how people are doing with like doctors or stuff like that. Like, oh, we can't trust doctors anymore. Well, we don't ever want to be that way as an agricultural industry. We want consumers to feel like they can trust us. And a lot of that comes down to like, we're human too. We are not perfect. We screw up every once in a while. We maybe say the wrong thing every once in a while. Yep. And I'm so glad that over recent years, social media has taken a turn from being like so picture perfect to like, no, let's see the real. And that's really great, especially for the agricultural industry, because there's a lot that isn't perfect about our individual operations. There's a lot that sucks in agriculture some days. But then there's a lot that's like, hey, we can use this as a learning opportunity. We can use this as an educating opportunity. Like, just share your story. Can you talk a little bit more about just like your journey with social media and sharing that story on such a public platform? And sharing something that just isn't super aesthetic and easy to talk about most days on such a public platform, and just like encouraging more to go and do it.
Yeah. Well, you know, when I first started this, it was like 5 or 6 years ago, and it was not, I had no intentions of it becoming a more focused on cattle feeding or more focused on ranching or anything, but that's kind of where my life has gone. So I started out as just kind of a general ag information. That was probably good just to get me started and to kind of figure out how to use social media and connecting with people online. But a couple years in, I started to figure out kind of what I loved the most and what I loved talking about the most. And also just based on feedback and engagement from followers, kind of what they liked seeing from me the most. And that was the things that I would write or thoughts that I had about different topics or issues or challenges or opportunities, whatever, in the cattle feeding industry. And so, you know, I don't do this full time like some people do. And so I'm probably a really bad influencer, because a lot of people I know will try to batch out content and plan that stuff and be consistent. I am terrible, and I might go off the grid for a couple months. I don't know. Who knows? Life gets really busy and school gets really busy. But I try to just talk about things as topics come up or as I'm feeling inspired. Because that is something people don't talk about enough, is that as an online creator, sometimes you just have nothing. You just feel creatively dry, and like nothing you think you're doing is interesting or worth sharing. And then you have times where you're like, I've got all the ideas and I don't have enough time in the day to get all this done, but I've got lots of stuff I want to share. And so, I think it just ebbs and flows. Growth also ebbs and flows. It took me a long time to grow as much as I did, and a lot of my growth happened really fast in the last couple years. I feel like Instagram has shifted a lot just in what type of content it promotes and what people want to engage with and follow based on. So it's changed a little bit just with the introduction of reels and all that stuff. But I have kind of found my niche in the feedlot industry, and my fiance's family also ranches, so I share about that as well. And so that kind of gives me an opportunity to do kind of like, I have a full circle perspective of the calves we're raising at the ranch and how cattle are finished in the feedlot. Where I lack is probably the backgrounding phase, but I do have the opportunity to kind of share that full circle story, getting to see both the beginning and the end of that life cycle, which I think is really cool. And I'm glad that I have that. But it's not always easy, because it is the most poorly perceived portion of our industry. Sometimes when things go viral or they just reach the wrong audience, you can get a lot of negative feedback and comments and DMs and things like that. And it can be exhausting to try and address them all, which is why I don't. I address the people who seem like they genuinely want to have a conversation, and the others I just don't engage with, because it is not humanly possible to engage with that many comments and have a conversation in a comment section when you're limited on character space. There's so many of these conversations require so much nuance. It's hard to do that in a comment section. And it's also really hard to have a conversation that I feel like is productive, because we can't hear someone's tone on social media. So like, I've done it where I've read someone's message and taken it the wrong way because I made up my own tone in my head. And certainly someone has also done that to me. So that makes it challenging as well. But I would say the good definitely outweighs the bad in terms of that. That happens, but I expect that to be part of it. And that's part of why I'm doing it anyway, is because I know there's people who disagree. And that's my opportunity to share my world with them. It would be pretty pointless if I only had an audience who cared with what I did 100%. So it is good that I have that challenge, and it helps me better my communication skills and learn how to discuss those things. So, I like to say that you don't need a social media following at all to advocate for our industry or whatever sector of the beef industry you're in. In fact, I think those in-person conversations are probably much more valuable than anything you can have online, because you can connect more as humans in face-to-face conversations. But if you want to share your life online, then I always tell people to go for it. And it's just kind of finding your style and your way of doing things and your aesthetic or your approach to things. But it's just a constant learning curve because it's constantly changing.
Oh yeah, it absolutely is. Can you talk a little bit more on just like that in-person advocacy as well? Because I feel like a lot of people look at advocacy these days, or being an advocate for agriculture, and they're like, well, I'm not going to share my life on social media. Are you kidding me? But all of us can be advocates in our daily lives, whether that be through a church organization, you're in a small group and you're with people that aren't in agriculture, and you just share about your story there, or it's at the local coffee shop, or it's like there's so many different ways that you can be an advocate for agriculture and share your story without it having to be online, and probably be easier actually, because you can approach that conversation and be like, well, I probably won't ever see this person again. So, if I absolutely botch it, it's okay. Right.
Well, and I mean, we all have an opportunity. Obviously, it's a lot harder to have these conversations in person, because you can't hide behind a screen. And people get really confident saying some of the things they say because they know that there's not going to be any consequences, basically, because they're hidden behind their phone screen.
Yeah.
But, I think there's lots of opportunities to advocate for agriculture. I mean, think about every time you get on a plane and you start making small talk with someone and they ask what you do. And then maybe it opens up a door to talk about something. Maybe they're really interested, or maybe they have questions. I know that's happened to me. And so that's a good opportunity to do it. Or maybe it's at the grocery store, and maybe you see someone who's struggling at the meat counter with what decision to make, because there's natural, there's organic, there's cage-free eggs, there's pasture-raised eggs, there's all this stuff, all these questions that people have because they have so many choices. So maybe you can provide some insight if someone has questions on something like that. I don't think they have to be any of these big grand moments. I think it's probably just all these little interactions that you have over time, based on where you're at. And the interactions you have in rural America are probably very different than what you might have in New York City or something. So, I mean, I think you just have to take what opportunities are given to you and use those to the best of your ability. Because I think that's all part of our role as producers in this industry, is just, you are where you are, take the opportunities that are given to you to share our industry positively with someone. And I think that fulfills your role as someone who's trying to sustain our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more with everything else that you just said. I feel like you summed it up perfectly, that like it's find your own path, find where your voice is best, and just like where you have the passion in sharing, because we all do have a short story to share, but it's going to look different in not only the story, but in the way that we share it for every single person. And that's perfectly okay. Anna, we have talked about so many amazing things today, but as we kind of like start to round out the podcast, I would love to chat about your piece of advice that you have for the next generation of agriculture.
Yes. As you know, I am seeing more and more people come into this industry who did not grow up in it. And I love that. And I think that's amazing. And I think it's a testament to everyone else in this industry is to just be lifelong learners. You can never know it all. There's always something new to learn. And I think being open to learning makes us better producers, makes us better consumers, just makes us overall better citizens in society when we are constantly willing and being open to learning. So that is probably my biggest piece of advice, is just be lifelong learners. You can always learn from each other. You can always learn something from maybe someone unexpected as well. So don't be opposed or against learning from somebody who is not in your industry that maybe knows something that you didn't know, So yeah, that's probably my best piece of advice.
I feel like that just is a testament to your life as well, as a person that, you didn't have to get a PhD to do what you want to do in agriculture, but you're like, you know what, we're going to go all out. We're going to learn everything that we possibly can, and just keep on going from there. Do you have any advice on like different places that people in agriculture, whether they be young college students or people in their young professional degrees, or maybe they're just a rancher, what are different ways that you kind of recommend people kind of continue that education and continue to push themselves down that path?
Yeah, a good question. And I think, there's lots of things on the internet, but finding credible sources, from universities or beef journals and things like that, I think there's so much that can be learned just from reading about things. I don't think it has to be these big grand gestures where you're going to the annual NCBA convention, which is great, but I know that costs money and it takes time that some people don't have. But there's lots to be learned just from reading things online. So there's lots of things that different states have their own extension services where they're trying to relay the research that their universities are putting out. I think if you can just kind of make it a part of your life to read these things once in a while, I think that's a great opportunity. But there are also those conferences and conventions like NCBA, local cattlemen's things, local cattlemen's meetings. I think those are all great opportunities as well. Those obviously require a bit more of a time and financial investment. But I think the opportunities are there. It's just a matter of, I think the hardest thing is a producer justifying that they have time for something like that, because there's always something more important to do and there's never enough time in the day, which I think we all understand. But if you feel that way, you certainly have time to spend 10 minutes reading about something on the internet.
Yes, absolutely. And specifically when Anna's research study goes public and gets published and all of those things, that would be a great thing to, print off on your computer and just, some light reading in the mornings, right? Just with your morning coffee, you can read a research study, right? What a great way to start the morning.
Right? Simple.
Just like we're just gonna dive head first into like terminology that I might have to have a dictionary next to me as I'm reading it, but it's really brain stimulating, all of the things for sure. And I think like one thing that you mentioned too is just like getting involved outside of like just your local areas, what you already know, things like that. And I also personally, I think there was a stigma, at least when I was younger and growing up, that like the people at USDA or the people at the farm bureaus or the extension offices were just like a bunch of old farts that didn't know what they were doing and they weren't any help anyway or stuff like that. At least that's how it was in my community. And so people didn't go to them for research and education and things like that. But I feel like there's a new wave kind of coming through of people that are coming back to the family farms and operations, and they are working at those different offices or just extension and education businesses and things like that, that truly do have a heart and a passion for helping you as farmers and producers and things like that. And a lot of them can be free too. USDA has a lot of really great free programs and resources. So do all of the extensions. Like go talk to your local livestock extension producer or horticulture and crops person, and 90% of them, their services are free to just go and sit down and talk to them about your feeding program or stuff like that for your small farming and ranching operation. And there's just so many ways that you can equip yourself that I feel like maybe in the past we discounted, and then now today they are amazing resources that have been revamped and brought new life back to them, and just different things like that, that don't be afraid to go and educate yourself in something that you've previously discounted or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Well, Anna, we have had so much fun today talking. I know I got just so much inspiration and joy out of this conversation, and I hope everyone listening did too. Can you share with everyone where they can find you if they want more of Anna, if they just want to see all the things that you're up to, everything like that, share your Instagram, LinkedIn, all of the different things.
Yes, I'm on Instagram as Anna M. Kobza, and then I'm also on LinkedIn just as Anna Kobza, which also is something I've been wanting to use more lately. So that's a good little reminder to myself today. But Instagram is my main platform where I share all the things and where I really enjoy connecting with people. So
absolutely. And we will have all of Anna's information linked down below. Make sure you go give her a follow. And especially if you know someone or work at a bigger feedlot or just a bigger cattle operation, be on the lookout for Anna as she finishes her PhD here in a few years. And you never know, maybe you'll be getting a cold call from Anna one of these days asking if you need some help with your nutrition programs or stuff like that. But Anna, thank you so much for coming on today. And to everyone listening, we will see y'all next week on another episode of the Next Generation Podcast. We'll see ya.